Welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast, featuring inspiring interviews with Etsy shop owners, hosted by Ijama Elazu.
Hi, and welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for another episode. And this episode in particular, I think is very important because it involves money. And not just money that you make, but money that you're going to have to pay to the government. So whenever money is involved, I say stop what you're doing and really pay attention. My guest this week is a return guest. It's been over 3 years since I had him on the podcast. Mark Faggiano is the CEO of TaxJar. And if you haven't listened to episode 86, I will link to that. That was when I first spoke with Mark. And a lot has changed over the last 3+ years when it comes to sales tax and selling online. And if you don't know what TaxJar is, in a nutshell, and Mark will probably say it better than I do, but TaxJar is a software system that helps you automate your sales tax calculations and filing your sales tax and reporting your sales tax. And it integrates with Etsy very easily. And if you have a Shopify store as well, which I know many of you do, it also integrates with Shopify as well. Before we get into our conversation, I want to say a quick thank you to Renee from Tripods, who helped to put a fire under me to get this episode going, because so many regulations were coming out with, online sellers and taxes and what have you. And I couldn't tell head from tail of what was going on. And Renee, thank you for specifically asking for an expert on this. And with that, I want to say welcome, Mark, and thank you for being my guest again.
Hey, so great to be here. Thanks for having me, John.
You are so welcome. I can't believe it's been over 3 years that we've talked, and so much has happened between then and now. But I'm so grateful that you're able to be back on the podcast to help educate us about what we need to know when it comes to sales tax as e-commerce sellers.
Yeah, I'm super glad to be here and thankful for the opportunity. And this is one of the things that I love to do, is trying to get folks up to speed on this crazy world of sales tax. For sure, a lot has happened in 3 years. And really, even in the short term, so since June 21st, the world of sales tax has pretty much been completely turned upside down. So, there's a lot to talk about, and I'm happy to help any way I can.
Yes, and now, because I don't know a lot about this, I will probably be asking some very elementary questions, and hopefully that will just help us all to understand and build on that foundation. And one thing I want to point out is, usually when we talk about taxes and sales tax with respect to Etsy, at least recently, it has primarily only affected US-based sellers. In this case, I just want to make sure I mention that international sellers are also most likely affected by this. So if you're outside the US, don't stop listening, because this could affect you as well. So Mark, can we start from somewhere just very basic? I think as online sellers, we've all heard the word nexus. What does that mean to us?
Yeah, great question. Nexus basically means that your business has a connection with a state or states that is significant enough to require you to follow their sales tax laws, which when we're talking about it, we usually use the word compliance. So comply with laws in a particular state or group of states. So that's the overview. What causes nexus is where things start to get really interesting, and also increasingly relevant based on what's happened in 2018. Mm-hmm. So typically or traditionally, nexus has been defined by things like physical presence.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're based in Massachusetts, your business is probably registered in Massachusetts. You're paying income tax in Massachusetts. You have a connection to Massachusetts, therefore you have nexus.
Okay.
Maybe you have some retail presence in, I'm going to stay with the same example, Rhode Island and Connecticut. Well, that's a significant enough connection that would say that you have to comply with the sales tax laws in those additional states over and above, where you're based in Massachusetts. So now you're complying in multiple states.
Okay.
Other examples are things like employees. Maybe you're a remote company, like TaxJar is a remote company. We don't have a single location. We hire people all around the country. Every time we hire someone in a new state, that state says we have nexus in that state. So I'm going to keep going if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Okay. So those are kind of the traditional definitions. What happened in June was that the Supreme Court said we're basically going to not so much toss out, but the requirement around a physical presence is not the heart of the matter anymore. That is not what defines nexus. So now, and this is all still being worked out, nexus can be triggered by either a sales volume or a transactional volume in a state.
Okay.
So the standards of these are still being worked out as we're recording this. But I'll give you an example. South Dakota has a standard that a lot of states are expected to follow of $100,000 or 200 transactions, meaning if your business in Massachusetts generates 100,000 in sales in South Dakota or 200 transactions, either one of those, you, according to the sales tax laws there, are required to get a sales tax license in the state of South Dakota, track your sales there, and follow their laws, meaning file sales tax returns in that state and remit what you've collected from your customers. So this is sort of a long-winded way of saying a 40-year-old law has been updated, and the idea, I'm not saying it's correct, but the idea is now this is supposed to be more reflective of, the world we live in now, which is the one that you and I are paying closest attention to, right, which is e-commerce.
Yeah.
The argument was the laws that were on the books were severely outdated. They were reflective of a time of, mail order catalog, pre-internet, all of that stuff, right? And what the states were saying was, look, all of these people are selling items into customers in our state, and there's no tax being collected, and that's not fair to either retailers that are in the state, physical retailers, but they're also kind of looking at it saying, look at all these transactions that are tax-free now.
Okay.
We don't like that, and we want tax to be collected on a higher percentage of transactions. Therefore, we think it's a good idea to overturn the law that was overturned by the Supreme Court back in June. So I'll be quiet for a second, and happy to dive in deeper anywhere it makes sense on that long-winded response.
Okay. Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much. So when I think of laws being overturned, my first thought is, oh no, that doesn't sound like a good thing. In this case, how bad is it that this law was overturned?
Great question. So as it stands now, I think this, could be a massive headache for your average e-commerce seller.
Okay.
And the reason being, by the way, one thing I want to clarify is this doesn't change necessarily or erase previous definitions of nexus. Okay, so this should be treated over and above. So, using the example before, if you were paying in 3 or 4 states already, or complying in 3 or 4 states already, you'll still have to do that. You don't get a free pass here. If anything, this should be looked at as there are additional triggers that have been put into place that could cause your business to comply in more states than you're complying in now.
Okay.
So if you look at it that way, that's not a great deal for a small business.
Right.
Because compliance with sales tax is, and I know I'm biased because I'm in the business, but it is a lot more difficult than income tax compliance, believe it or not. There is no federal legislative body that's dictating law here. Instead, it's left up to the states.
Yes.
States have to decide, do we want sales tax or not? 45 states do. And then they each can write their own laws, right? Which gets into rates, definitions of what's taxable and what's not. Yeah. When returns are due, all that stuff's different. So to finally get back to your question, trying to wrap your head around, wow, I'm actually going to have to do this in multiple states, dozens of states now. That all comes down to time. And your average small business doesn't have time to spare as it is already. And they should be more focused on trying to turn a profit and support themselves and their families. So, this is a threat to that, right? This is time that has to be spent to make sure that they're in compliance, because I've talked to thousands and thousands of customers over the year. Nobody wants to do the wrong thing, right? Everybody, if they know the laws, they want to comply. They're not trying to break the law on purpose. So, unfortunately, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and speaking about breaking the law, what's the worst that could happen if we choose to ignore this because we feel like we're just a small? I should stop saying we. Let me speak in the first person. If I feel like, okay, I'm a low volume seller, I don't make in excess of 5 figures from my Etsy shop, and my sales are, yes, I sell, to different states in the country and some international sales, but is there a dollar figure or a sales transaction number of sales that I make that will trigger, the feds to come after me? What's the worst that could happen if I don't do anything right now?
Right. So that's part of what has changed, is that there now are more defined triggers. Okay. Right. So there are dollar amounts which are typically $100,000, $200,000 in a state, right? Not overall, or 1 to 200 transactions, somewhere around there in a state. So you could be selling $5 items. 200 transactions into California may not be, so ridiculous, right? Maybe they would accomplish that pretty quickly. Okay, so look, this comes down to risk assessment, and doing what's best for your business. Okay. And I've given this answer. I probably gave this exact same answer 3 years ago when I talked to you, but it still stands the same. To me, the states they're much more interested in higher volume, higher dollar sellers, right? Yeah. They have limited resources. If they're going to spend their time trying to claw back taxes that were not collected, of course they're going to go after the big volume instead of the smaller seller where they could get $100, right? Yeah. So there are 2 types of people that I talk to. One are the folks who they cannot even bear the thought of being non-compliant or breaking the law, right? Yes. They just want to go to bed at night and feel relaxed about what they're doing, and they've got enough stuff to worry about. And to them, I say, look, I understand that, but you also have to be realistic, which is also the second type of person I talk to, which says, I'm going to monitor my sales. And yes, maybe I triggered the 200 transactions in a state, but I'm really at 250, right? And the dollar volume is tiny. It comes out to $2,500. I'm willing to risk. I'm choosing not to comply, and I'm willing to risk if that state finds out about me and comes after me, that B, I'm going to be able to afford the penalties and interest that they're going to assess me, right? So for a small volume, small dollar seller, they're not going to throw you in jail, okay, or anything like that. Those cases do happen on the very high end when the people are manipulating the system. But for your again, for the average seller, that's not what's going to happen. But some of those sellers say, look, if they come after me for a $500 penalty, I can't afford that. So I have to comply now just in case, it's kind of my insurance for not getting caught somewhere down the line. So that's where I'm constantly trying to coach sellers to think through that decision.
Okay.
And, if you're comfortable being in non-compliance when you should be, and the dollar value, if you did get caught by some way, is not penalizing, then that's probably the best decision for your business.
Okay. So if a seller is listening to this right now and says, okay, I'm right on the border, I'm scaling up, I'm aiming to grow my business and earn more from my sales and increase my sales volume, where should he start? Is there some backtracking that needs to be done, or do you think it's okay to just start from where you are with the tracking and don't worry about going back and trying to calculate taxes owed from past sales?
So the first thing I always recommend is, we talk about this a lot at TaxJar, start with your home state. Start where you're based.
Okay.
If you're in a state that has sales tax, you should comply there no matter what your volume. Okay. And the reason being is because it's not difficult for the state to connect the dots to figure out what you're doing. You're already filing income tax returns.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So the higher the volume you get there, and it may not even be a high volume, there's enough context that the state can draw on to figure out if you're collecting tax or not. So start there. That's the bare bones. You have to be doing that. Ideally, in a perfect world, you're doing that from day one. So even before you've made a sale, you're set up to go. But that's not realistic in most cases, right? So try to do that as soon as you can. Now, the question is, which other states do I comply? I would be I would be patient and thoughtful on how to do that, and would be tracking if you have any sort of suspicion. Most sellers don't know the breakdown of, wow, I have tons of customers in Florida who most sellers don't know that, at least the ones that I talk to. There are tools available. TaxJar has a great tool which will tell you, it'll look at your transactions and will tell you, hey, you're over the threshold in Florida and Texas. So that makes it easy. So if you're ever curious or ever have some sort of suspicion that you have higher volumes in some states or another, we can really detail that out for you and help you make those decisions of where to go next. Okay.
And you said start with your state. How about sellers who are not based in the U.S.? Should they just start with whatever their own international sales tax laws are?
For sure. So whether you're in the U.S. or in any other country, you definitely, I highly advise. Keep in mind, I'm not an attorney or CPA or anything like that. Just someone who's helped build this business and talked to a lot of experts that are involved. I highly recommend being compliant in your home base. So if you're in another country, look into those laws and just try to be as buttoned up as possible there. If you're in, the UK and you're thinking, oh gosh, what do I do here in the U.S.? Mm-hmm. Again, my best advice would be to go back to that risk assessment argument. Get educated on where you may potentially be over thresholds or where you have nexus. Mm-hmm. And there's, again, lots of ways that nexus can be created. And then once you have that data and you're knowledgeable on where you technically should be complying, then you can make decisions on, okay, this state I seem to be more behind than another particular state, so I'm going to choose to comply there. At the end of the day, the state doesn't care if you're sitting in, San Diego or if you're in Tokyo, right? Yes. They just want you to comply. So yes. Just know that you're not completely immune to it if you're sitting somewhere overseas.
Okay. Now, at one point earlier in 2018, Washington and Pennsylvania passed some type of legislation that required anyone who sold to residents of those states to pay taxes, sales tax. And so Etsy put into their platform a system of collecting that tax from the sellers on behalf of those states. And so if I were to sell something to a resident of either of those states, in my invoice, I would see it would break it down by, the product price, shipping, and then the tax that was collected. How are we as sellers supposed to, what do we do with that information? Like, because Etsy has collected it and passed it on to the sale, does that then relieve us from any additional responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that we get all the time.
Okay.
So this just another example of where things can get confusing pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. It really depends on the profile of you, the seller. Okay. So the simplest profile would be you're only on Etsy and you are not selling anywhere else. Then the way that this should work, and this is still relatively new, is you should be okay in those two states.
Okay.
Meaning you don't have to do anything else.
Okay.
But where we see things get complicated is a lot of our customers are not just on Etsy, right?
Yeah.
They have a Shopify store. Maybe they're on Amazon. Yep. They're wherever their stuff is selling, yes. Right? Mm-hmm. They're going to craft fairs on the weekends and, wherever they can generate revenue.
Yep, that's true.
So what's tough here is Etsy is only involved in the Etsy transactions, right? So Etsy has no idea what else you're doing. They're not involved in your Shopify store. They don't have access to that data. So, hypothetically, the state could come back and say, wow, this is, decent revenue being generated. And it's not totally known what data is being passed on to the states on behalf of the seller. They're not supposed to be, itemizing it, saying these are the folks that, are, let's say they're remitting $1 million to Washington. Mm-hmm. As far as we can tell, they're not generating a list that says these are the 10,000 Etsy sellers who are involved in this transaction.
Oh, okay.
But that being said, states are getting more aggressive, asking marketplaces like Amazon for data around, who potentially has nexus in our state. And Amazon has coughed up that information in multiple states so far. Oh. So, if you're omni-channel, multi-channel, whatever you want to call it, then you potentially have some exposure there, because Etsy is only remitting to the state a portion of your sales, and it's probably the right move to become compliant in those two states. And now you have to file the returns for all of your other sales outside of Etsy. So that's where it gets tricky. Hopefully that I explained that clearly.
Yeah. Oh, that does for sure, because I know that that was confusing when Etsy just started doing that. So it was like, okay, you're taking out the taxes for us. Does that mean we don't do anything? Do we still go back and file taxes and say, hey, this is how much Etsy took out? Are we good now? So thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah, of course.
Now, to take it a step further, I recently made a sale to a customer in Australia. And for the first time, I noticed that there was a line item for VAT, that was paid on that particular transaction. In the same vein, is that also something I need to worry about as well? Or is that something that the buyer needs to be concerned about as a resident of Australia or whatever other countries do that?
As far as I'm aware, and I actually did not know that they were collecting VAT tax. As far as I'm aware on that one, you shouldn't have anything to worry about there.
Okay.
But again, that's news to me, so I did not know that one.
Okay. Yeah, that's relative. That happened within the last month, and that was the first time I've ever seen that. I've sold in Australia before, and I've never seen that before show up. So I figured something must have changed. But I had no additional information. And there's not really much as a seller you can do. It just shows up like the Washington and Pennsylvania sales taxes. Okay, so I'm glad that we've talked about that. Now, it sounds all complicated, but that's where TaxJar comes in. And so for that Etsy seller who's feeling a little bit overwhelmed now, knowing what's required as an online seller of her, where does TaxJar come in? What specifically does TaxJar offer that Etsy seller who is just now realizing that this sales tax is no joke and needs to be taken seriously?
Sure. So our goal is to make e-commerce easier for everybody, every seller that's out there. So, our approach is not only just focused on the product, but also on education, because we realize trying to get knowledge on this stuff is really, really hard. So we take that part very, very seriously. Okay. And then what we do is, once we feel like we've given somebody the information they need, and we trust that an Etsy seller, any small business owner, is going to make the best decision. They're smart enough to make really good decisions for their business. Mm-hmm. We build tools to help them be in compliance to the point where they don't even really need to go to TaxJar anymore, right? Because we're going to handle the whole thing. So we do everything from basically how it works is you make a connection from where you're selling to TaxJar. It's very easy to do. It takes less than a minute. You do it one time. And what that does is it gives us access to your sales and tax data, nothing else, just that sales and tax data. Okay. And you can do it, if you're an Etsy and Shopify seller, you can connect to both of those. Okay. We'll take all of that data. With that, we will do several things. Like I mentioned before, we have a checker which will tell you, okay, hey, you've gone over the threshold in South Dakota. You have Nexus there. We're basically telling you we highly recommend that you comply in that state. Mm. Okay, and then we also do what we call TaxJar reporting, which is almost, think of it like tax prep. We'll take all the data across all those places that you're selling, aggregate it all together, and then give it back to you in these reports, which are customized by state. And they're exactly what you would need to go file those returns if you wanted to go file them yourself, or give them to your CPA, which a lot of folks do. Okay. So we do that, and we charge a transactional volume. We charge based on transactional volume for that. So it depends on how many transactions you're sending us. Okay. And then for an additional fee, we will take care of the rest of compliance for you, which is filing those sales tax returns and remitting what you owe to the state. So remember, you shouldn't be paying anything out of pocket, right? You're basically the person in the middle here. You've collected $5 from your customer in California. You're holding on to that, and then you're paying it to the state. And where it gets complicated is the state returns most of them are not that friendly. They're time consuming. Aggregating all that data to be able to fill out that form is usually on, for an average small business, 3 to 5 hours for every return that has to get filed, which if you're filing in dozens of states a month, that's, might have to go hire someone.
Yeah.
So we're a replacement for that. So our happiest and best customers are folks that have seen the data inside of TaxJar, they trust it, and then they're all very happy to have us take care of that really painful and cumbersome filing process, so that they just get an email and saying your return to California has been filed, you're all set, and they can spend all their time focusing on the fun stuff and the important stuff, which is how do I increase my sales and what prices should I be charging, all that good stuff.
And so does TaxJar know when to submit sales tax for each different state? So as a seller, I don't have to worry that California is due quarterly and another state is due monthly or another state is due annually. TaxJar knows all that stuff and just automatically does it if I opt for the auto filing option?
Yes. So we know the deadlines are different across all the states. We know, and there's also different frequencies, right? So you could be this is funny, but maybe not funny. You could be a quarterly filer in Massachusetts, an annual filer in Florida, a monthly filer in Texas, and a fiscal annual filer in California.
Oh my.
We know how to differentiate and translate all that out so that we know when those returns are due and those returns get filed on time, guaranteed.
Oh, okay, good, because that is, to say the least. Now,
yes.
and the same for international sellers as well. So it doesn't matter where you're selling from. The states basically want their money when they want it, and TaxJar will figure out how much that is and when and send it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep, that's really well said. And the more money that you're collecting,
yes,
the faster they want it. Right.
Yeah.
So they will move the frequency of the filings to a monthly basis. Maybe you were on an annual basis, and then they look at the numbers and say, wow, it'd be nice to get a chunk of that each month instead of waiting 12 months for it. So it's like anything else. The bigger your business gets, the more complex your compliance portfolio, if you will get, and the requirements will increase from there.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way in California. Was the more you make, the faster they want the money. They don't want to wait. It's like, oh, you're making more now, we want it now.
It's a shame it looks that way, but unfortunately that's just the way.
I had another question and it just escaped me. It had to do with TaxJar. Oh, okay. It will come back. I'll move on to something else, and hopefully I will remember that. What's the best entry level for a new subscriber to TaxJar? You have different plans. How do we know how do I know as a seller what the best plan for me is?
So we keep that really simple.
Okay.
We will basically charge you based on what plan you should be on.
Okay.
Right. So if you sign up for the lowest plan, which is $19 a month for up to 1,000 transactions, because like a lot of sellers, you don't really have any idea how many transactions you have, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then we figure out you're supposed to be, you have 3,000 transactions per month. we'll just charge you for the appropriate plan, and then maybe ask you to switch plans. But yeah, the way it's set up is supposed to be simple and transparent, so you don't have to think too hard about, oh, maybe I'm going to overspend.
Okay.
If you have any doubt, just sign up for a lower plan, and we'll do the math for you.
Okay. All right. And if you're interested in signing up for TaxJar, I am an affiliate of TaxJar, and what that means is if you use the link I will put in the show notes for this episode, or if you go directly to it, it's convome.com/TaxJar, TaxJar. I will get, oh man, I don't know what I'll get. I'll get some kind of credit for referring you over to TaxJar. It doesn't cost you anything additionally. It just gives me referral credit for sending you over. And all that goes back to support the podcast. I would appreciate it if you use my affiliate link, but you do not have to. You can go directly to TaxJar as well. You get a 30-day free trial. And Mark, there are no activation fees or anything, and people can cancel anytime. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. No hidden fees. All the pricing is completely transparent. You get that 30 days. If you have any doubt whether or not TaxJar can help you, just go try it for 30 days. You don't even have to put in a credit card for the free trial. And just go in there, see the data, use the tool to figure out where you have nexus, and that'll help you make a decision on whether or not this tool will be right for you in the long term.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. So again, that link is convome.com/TaxJar. You can just type that into your browser. I will also have a link in the show notes for this episode. Mark, what if someone gets stuck? What kind of support and help can we expect along the way using TaxJar?
Sure. So blog.taxjar.com is jam-packed with it's nearly 1,000 blog posts about sales tax. Don't laugh, but it's true. It goes back to what I said before. We take our role of trying to educate folks very, very seriously, and there's just loads of great content in there to help educate you.
Okay.
We try the best we can to try to pair up that education and those posts with where you are in your journey to become compliant, right? So once we get to know you better, we'll suggest things for you to read to help you feel better about the decisions you're making and to be more confident. Okay. You can also email us at success@taxjar.com.
Okay.
And we have a absolutely fantastic group of folks who are available to help you out and coach you on your journey to becoming sales tax compliant.
Okay.
So we take that part very seriously.
I have to say, I was looking at the page that has the TaxJar staff or employees, and everybody looks happy. I don't know why that is. I don't know what you guys are doing over there, but everybody looked happy. And
well, we try. We try. It's an amazing team. I'm blown away by the people that are on the team. We're very, very lucky to have such a great group of people, and most of them do not come from sales tax backgrounds, but they have their PhD pretty much in sales tax by now. Wow. And one of the things that we do is we take very seriously how important it is to like the people you work with.
Yeah.
So those are the people we hire, the people that we want to work with, that we think can bring a lot to the team and help our customers be successful.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, it looks that way. Mark, before I let you go, what's the last but most important piece of information that you want that Etsy seller who is listening right now to know when it comes to sales tax and running her online business?
If you feel overwhelmed, you are normal. So everybody feels overwhelmed at some point, whether or not I always describe the learning curve to becoming, or maybe it should be called the compliance curve, but whatever it is, between the point that you're at and becoming fully compliant, it's complicated.
Okay.
And I admit it's very intimidating.
Yes.
But if you can get yourself out of that mindset, know that there are really good people that want to help you get compliant, so that, again, you can just put this behind you and focus on the fun stuff of running your business. And that's where we see our role at TaxJar.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you for explaining what these new regulations are, what they mean to us as sellers, and just how we can start to process the information, and how TaxJar can help us. I really appreciate you taking the time to come back on and do this. I feel like I know a lot more now, because I really, like I told you in the very beginning, I really had no clue. I mean, I had a clue and I knew it wasn't good, but I didn't know. It's not horrible. It's just, it feels better to be informed.
Great. Well, my pleasure. Really enjoyed our chat.
Thanks, Mark. Again, to check out TaxJar, you can go to convome.com/TaxJar. When you land on that page, there is a widget that you can email questions to, or you can send your questions directly to success@taxjar.com. I will also have that email address in the show notes for this episode, so that if you have any additional questions that perhaps we didn't address, you can send that in and get your questions answered. Remember, you do get a free 30-day trial. No credit card, no commitment, nothing. You can check it out and decide if it's the best solution for you. Taxes are serious. You might be at a point right now where you're not making enough to feel like you'll get on the radar of, the IRS or the IRS or any other government agencies for, taxes. Maybe not the IRS, your state government, whomever wants the sales taxes. But also, like Mark said, consider how much risk you want to take with not getting into compliance right away. And I will have links to everything in the show notes for this episode. I thank you for listening, and I will be back next week.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a review too. Visit convome.com to leave a comment or feedback on this episode.